Hello there, all my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this pretty simple but very effective wirework bracelet using beautiful gallery wire. So even though the basic principle and technique of this bracelet is pretty simple, the final effect we achieve is very beautiful and does give a very big impact. Now, if you want to support me in any way, you can always like, share and subscribe, of course, and feel free to share anything you make from any of my tutorials on social media. All my links will be in the description box down below. Now you can also sign up to be a member on my channel. I offer different perks like early access and exclusive tutorials, among other things, so feel free to check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, if you want to learn how to make this bracelet in particular, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. Now the wire that I'm using is a regular round bare copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 0.8mm. This is going to be the base wire. Next we're going to need a weaving wire, and this one is a 0.4mm regular round bare copper wire as well. Now for the gallery wire in the middle, I'm using this braided style that's also bare copper, so it's going to match nicely with the wire and we can easily oxidize it if we want to. But you could also make your own if you don't have this specific wire. So for instance, you could make a braid with the base wire and basically just use that instead. You'd be able to use these instructions for that as well and get a very similar result. And finally, we just need some findings as well. So I've got a lost or claw clasp, an extended chain and a couple of jump rings to put it all together. But you can of course make your own clasp or use whatever you prefer. Now for the tools, first of all I got a pair of flush cutters so we can of course cut our wire, including that gallery wire. A pair of chain nose and tweezer nose pliers to help manipulate the wire. And finally, I'm using these 6-step bell making pliers for any loops we need to make. You can of course use round nose pliers for that as well. Now, like always, you can find the full material list and useful links in the description box down below, including for the gallery wire that I'm using if you want to have a look specifically at that one. And there's also going to be a discount code to go with that, so make sure to check that out. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So the lengths of wire that we'll need is first of all about 20 centimeters of the gallery wire here is what I've cut. Now of course this length in particular will depend mostly on the size that you want to make, and what I've done is just make sure to cut the wire basically where it would be crossing if it was a braid. So you can see there, so on the outer edges you could see where the wire would cross over. So I'm just cutting there, basically where the wire is the narrowest. So just like that. And then we have the nicest and neatest edge that we can get. So you could of course use the gallery wire here or one like it if you find a different one. Or like I said, you could make your own with wire. And actually I have my ring on here. It's quite a good example. So you can see you could achieve a very similar effect by basically making your own braid with wire and then using that for the center part. And you get a nice result for that as well. So it's completely up to you. And then I have two lengths of about 50 centimeters each of the 0.8mm, so the base wire. And finally I have about 5 meters of the 0.4mm for the weaving wire. Now this is a long length, but we're going to start from the middle of this, so only work with half this length at a time. So now that we have all the wires ready, the first thing I'm going to do is grab one of the base wires, and first of all I'm finding the middle here, and we need to then create a loop that's going to be on one end of the bracelet for the clasp. So I'm just using my 6-step bell making pliers for that. You can use round nose pliers or whatever you have, and I'm just going to use one of the steps to shape this around and just get kind of a nice loop shape here. And then I'm going to take my tweezer nose pliers and actually start to bend these so they come straight out to the sides. Because we are starting basically from one end of the bracelet, in this case from the loop end, and then working our way towards the other end. So we have our loop in place. Now I'm going to grab the other base wire and just kind of align them, and this is going to be the midpoint of both. And what we're going to do is start to attach these two together. So that is where we are going to grab our weaving wire, and here I'm also going to first of all find the midpoint, so just put the two ends together and then bring it all the way down to that midpoint where we're going to start weaving from. And this is how we're then going to start attaching everything together. So I'm just starting with the base wire that doesn't have the loop on it. And I'm going to literally just attach our weaving wire here by wrapping it around and making sure it stays above that midpoint. And just wrap it around a couple of times. And then what we need to do is, before we wrap too much, start bringing in the other length. I like to just make sure my wraps are nice and tight, so squeeze them together if you need to. So I'm bringing in the other base wire that has the loop on. Again, I'm making sure they're even, so I keep pushing the ends together there, so I know where my loop is that midpoint. And these wraps that we're currently doing are going to sit below that loop, because we're going to eventually start wrapping them together, but we need to kind of transition from one side of the loop to the other. So we basically need to wrap however many times we need to cover the underside of that loop. So maybe just 1 or 2 more times before we can then start to weave them together. And what I'm going to do is use the diagonal wire weave, and to do that we need to wrap around the bottom one by itself first of all, which is now the one that has the loop on. So this is going to be the first wrap on that base wire, and make sure the base wires there keep laying flat next to each other. And then we need to wrap over the top of both of them and push it down nice and tight, then come up between the two and push that down so we can wrap over and around the top one by itself. And this is what I like to call one full round of this weave, and also keep pushing them together so we get a nice and even uniform weave all the way. And what we can do is literally do the same thing on the other side. Again, if you find that you just need a couple more wraps on the single base wire below the loop there, and feel free to do that. Again, if you find you just need some more wraps on that single base wire that's below or above, however you want to look at it, the loop, then feel free to do that, just so we get to the other side of the loop. But you just want to grab the other end of the weaving wire, so you can see we're starting from the middle of the weaving wire and using one side of it at a time, and they're going to go up each their own side of the bracelet as well. So here I'm just going to wrap around the bottom one by itself, same weave, push that down nice and tight, then over the top of both base wires so we can come up between the two, push that down, and then wrap around the top one by itself, and then down behind both again. So we've now connected the two fully together, and I like to just push all my wraps nice and tight. So there we go. This is our starting point, and like I said, going to be one end of the bracelet. So what I like to do before I move on from here, because we don't want to accidentally weave too much, so I like to bring in my gallery wire or braid if that's what you're using, and just make sure that we don't make this too wide, but we also need to make sure that it's wide enough. So basically we need to weave so that it's more or less as wide as the gallery wire, or just over, because we need to then bend these base wires away from this end here to be able to go up the sides of the gallery wire. So judging that, I think it looks like it's actually quite the perfect width right now. So I don't really want to do too much more wrapping on this end before I start to bend the base wires. So I'm just going to bring my pliers back here, and I'm going to take the base wire without the loop first, because that's the one that's closest to the gallery wire. So that needs to be bent to be the closest to it as well, coming up the side. So bend that away from the loop, you could say, to come straight up. And then of course we need the same thing with the same wire, but on the other side. And then hopefully we'll end up with just a perfect fit that we can slot the gallery wire into. So we end up with something a bit like this, and we can then just test it. Bring the gallery wire back and see if it fits nicely. Now, like I said, obviously we don't want to make this too wide or too narrow. So we want it to fit so it sits more or less just on the side of the gallery wire, but it's okay if there's just a little bit of air or a little bit of space to breathe, because you also want to make sure we can fit any weaving wire that we wrap around as we go in between them. So I would say this looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that spacing. So I'm going to just go ahead and then bend the other wire as well. Basically make the corners, you could say. So just go a little bit further out and start to bend this to come up right next to the first one that we bent, and then go straight up in that direction. And then of course repeat the same on the other side. Bring that straight up as well, and you can just kind of smooth out the wires as we go, and then just check that you're happy with everything. I think I just need to bend this one a little bit more. So we have something that looks a bit like that now. And again, just to double check, make sure that the gallery wire still fits in there. And that looks pretty good to me. So before we can bring the gallery wire in and incorporate that into the weaving as well, we need to bring the weaving wires around to the side. So right now we're still kind of weaving on the end here, but we've also got a corner right next to where we are. So basically what you want to do is, however much space you have, you can maybe fill in another round of the weave or so. I think I can do that with this one. Make sure to push them nice and tight, and then just go over both of them. And just go around the inner one by itself, and then come down behind all of them. And what you can then tell is I don't really have enough space left in this corner to do that same weave any more rounds of it. So I'm just going to basically, to get around the corner and get to the other side here of the corner, I'm just going to wrap around this outer one to basically get around the corner, you could say. So just wrap around however many times you need to move from this end of the piece, so this side of the corner, to this other side of that corner, until we basically are in a position where we can pick back up the same weave. So I think maybe just one more wrap here and I should be able to. Yeah, I would say so. So just to make sure, push them nice and tight together, and then I'm going to start the weave back up. So bottom wire by itself, around over the top of both wires, come up between them, so we can wrap around the top one by itself, or the inner one, however you want to look at it. And that is how we've then made our way around the corner. And that's the one side, and we just basically need to do the same thing on the other side here. So see where we're at, how much space we have to fit anything. And just get this side into the same position. So before I get too much further than this as well, I just want to make sure that I don't weave too far before we also start incorporating the gallery wire in, because we want to start catching on to that as soon as we can. So just kind of set that in place, and then check if maybe the next wrap, and I actually think that's the case for mine here, I could then incorporate the gallery wire. So I'm going to start off the next wrap here, or the next round of the weave. So again, just around the bottom one by itself. Now of course you can do some more rounds before you get to that point if that's what suits yours. And over the top of both, come up between the two. But now, instead of wrapping around the top one by itself like we did before, we have the gallery wire to incorporate. And basically what that's going to do is work as another base wire. So it has these little gaps on the outer edges, and It is the very first little gap on this side that I'm working on that's going to basically work as now the new top base wire. So I'm going to get right to the end of the weaving wire that I'm working with, just the one on this side. The other one is just kind of out of the way and try not to get tangled up in it. And then I'm going to put this little end of wire through that very first gap on this side. We then just want to pull this all the way through, nice and gently, so we don't get any kinks or anything. All the way through, and obviously to begin with it's still quite long, but we're going to use it up more and more as we go, and it'll obviously then gradually get shorter. And also everything is a bit fiddly at the moment, right here at the beginning, because things are still kind of loose and wobbling all over the place. But as soon as we've done a couple of wraps incorporating that gallery wire, it's going to be a lot more sturdy and less fiddly to hold on to. So I've then wrapped over the top of the base wires, or the one that's right next to the gallery wire, and then that gap in the gallery wire as well. Like I said, that works as another base wire, so I've wrapped over the top of 2 base wires, you could say, and then pull that tight and bring it down behind all the wires. So in this round here, we incorporated the gallery wire through the very first gap on this side with just the top wrap, just one wrap here. So I'm going to go directly into the next round of the weave. So wrap around the bottom base wire by itself and over the top of both of them. Now obviously the gallery wire is still a bit fiddly and kind of wants to flop all over the place, but that'll get easier to hold on to as soon as we've basically done another wrap or two incorporating that. And we literally just do the same weave here, now only wrapping around the 2 original base wires, not incorporating the gallery wire, until we reach the next gap in the gallery wire on this side. So do how many rounds you need to get to that point of the weave. So that's the point I've got to now. The next round I'm going to do of the weave, I'm going to incorporate the gallery wire again in the next gap of the outer edge of it. So start the next round by wrapping around the bottom one, wrapping over the top of both of them, come up between the 2, so we can then wrap over the top of the 2 original base wires, and then also the gallery wire, kind of acting as another base wire in this case. So to do that, find the very end of the weaving wire, so we can just feed it through that next gap on the outer edge, and then just gently pull it all the way through. Avoid any kinks if you can, and pull that down to be nice and tight. And always you can use pliers at any point to help push your wraps nice and tight together. And you can see that is now captured through the next gap in the gallery wire there. Come down behind all the wires and you just start your next round of the weave. Again, only then working with the 2 original base wires until we run into the next gap in the gallery wire where we can incorporate it again. And that is basically what we keep repeating. Now you can obviously find your own rhythm and own pattern of it, so you might be using different materials, but you probably will find that it's going to be quite repetitive between the times where you need to make a round of the weave where you incorporate into the gallery wire. So for instance, for this one here, I made 3 rounds between the first 2, so I might need to make 3 rounds again, or it might need to be 1 more or 1 less, and then it might just alternate like that. For instance, the previous one I made here, I alternated between 2 and 3 rounds between the ones where I incorporate the gallery wire. So it all depends, and there's no right or wrong or anything. Literally just figure out what fits for your materials that you're using. But of course, you just continue like this along this side of the bracelet, and then we also just need to do the same on the other side. It's exactly the same principle. Of course, we're just kind of working on the other side of the bracelet, so if you can flip it and hold it however you feel comfortable, or you can kind of work with it upside down, whatever suits you best. But you just want to do the same weave, so wrapping around the outer base wire first, Now this round here is going to be the one where I'm incorporating the gallery wire, like I did on the other side. Wrap over the top of both of the base wires. Make sure it's nice and tight. Come up between the two. And then for the next wrap, find the end of your weaving wire and just feed it through the very first gap on the other side there, so the side facing furthest away from me in this case. Pull that through gently. And then make that nice and tight. Push it down. Make sure your wraps are nice and tight. And then come all the way behind the base wires to start your next round. So you can do one side at a time, work all the way along, and then go to the other side and work all the way, or you can work a bit on this side, swap to the other and swap back and forth. It's completely up to you and how you prefer to work it, but just keep doing this all the way to the other end, of course to the length that you need for your bracelet. So now I kept weaving here and I've got the full length that I need. Now at the end you can see we have excess left of the gallery wire, so I just want to cut that down. And to do that we need to just be able to get our pliers in place, so you can just gently bend these down a bit. Just enough so we can get the pliers in. And again I want to make sure I'm going to cut it on where a crossover point is. So basically the down part of the outer curves and where they kind of cross over in the braid formation. Just cut straight across. Get rid of the excess, and let's see if we're happy. I can see just want to cut a little bit extra off on the one side, and there we go. I'm just going to bend the base wires here back up so they come straight out like that. And then what we just need to do is finish off this end as well. So I've just ended up my weave here for now. What I'm going to do is, you can use pliers or you can just kind of grab. Now the inner two wires is what we want to bend first on either side, and you want to bend them towards the opposite side. So like I said, you can use pliers if you can get them in there, or you can kind of just use your hands and just bend them so they go straight across the end. Basically how we started out, but obviously here we're dealing with the ends of the wire. So straight across, something like that, and I'm just going to flip it and then do the same with the other inner one. So cross that over to the opposite side. So we're putting a bend in it and creating these corners, and they are now overlapping each other. And then what we're going to do is cut off the excess. Now what I'm going to do is cut them off roughly in the middle. It doesn't have to be precise, but cut just one at a time. And I'm making sure, use my flush cutters, I have the back side there pointing towards where this specific wire is coming from. So we get a nice straight cut like that. And get rid of that. And then flip it and do the same with the other one. And I'm going to try and make sure that I'm cutting the other one, so when we end up with both of the ends cut, they're going to meet up as close to each other as possible. So kind of bump into each other there and make a nice and secure finish. So rather cut off too little than too much, because you can always cut off a bit extra if you need to. So start with something like that, and then you can use pliers just to get in there and kind of position everything in place. See if we are happy with it, or we need to trim a little bit more. You can then push them into position if we have them short enough, of course, and kind of force them into place there. And if they meet up perfectly like that, and that is absolutely perfect. If you've ended up with a bit of a gap as well, don't worry about it, it will still work out fine, because these are the inner wires, and we're going to then use the other two here to kind of put on the outside, and of course also make another loop. So I'm going to leave them at that, and then I'm going to start bringing in the other wires. So again, I'm going to just place my pliers roughly where I want this corner to be. Of course, like I said, these are going to be outside of the other ones, so it's just a little bit further up the wire, and then bring it across towards the other side. So again, they're crossing straight over the end there, and flip it, do the same with the other side, grab the wire and bend it across. So again, these two wires now cross over each other. And here, instead of cutting these off, I'm going to use these to make a loop with. Or of course, if you want to make the clasp built in, you can use these lengths as well to make the clasp itself. So to do that, I'm going to just grab one of them, and in the middle of the bracelet, so just look at your piece further down here, I'm going to place my pliers and bend one of the wires back up, going away from the end. So something a bit like that, because this is going to then end up actually forming the loop. Now the other length that's crossing out to the side, I'm going to then use to wrap around here and then help secure everything in place. So just gently start to wrap it around. So we fasten it here in the middle, and you just need to wrap it once or twice. Something a bit like that. And then I'm just going to bring it to the back here, cut off the excess. And just make sure to squeeze that end down. And then we have this length left, and with that I'm going to make the wrapped loop. So just place your pliers on that length a little bit above that wrap that we just made, and then bend it roughly about a 90-degree angle. I'm going to get pliers here to make the loop with, place them on the bend, bring it back around. So we end up creating a full circle. Grab onto that and then start to wrap this around below the circle, filling in that little gap that we left until we don't have any more space to wrap. And then we just want to go to the back here and cut off the excess. And again, just make sure to squeeze that down. Now we have a loop in place, and then what we have left is obviously the wires that we were just bending and making the loop with are still not wrapped on this end. So that's the last thing we have to do, using what we have left of our weaving wires here. So basically there's no specific trick to this. It's kind of just trying to make it as secure as possible and wrap and cover as much of the base wires as possible. So we obviously have the corners to get around, so just start on one side at a time. I can see, I think I can fit one more wrap of the weave that we've been doing, so I'm just going to do that one more round here, bring that through until we've then reached the corner. Just do that final wrap on the inner wire. Remember, obviously we did cut these off, so there's not much length of them left to work with for the base wires. Specifically the inner ones, because they're also loose on the ends there. They're not fastened down like they are on the outer ones with the wrapped loop. Now I've reached the corner on the inner one, so what I'm going to do is swap to just wrapping around the outer wire and basically get from this side of the corner over the corner and then to the other side of it, so we can get back to wrapping around both of the base wires. And that is just how you want to get around the corner here. Let's do however many wraps you need to around the outer base wire by itself, working your way around the corner. And then I just want to go back to wrapping around both of them. And you don't have to do anything specific like follow the weave we've been doing. You can if you're able to, but obviously, like I said, because they are cut off and we have short little lengths left of these, it can be a little bit difficult and fiddly. So you can also just do a couple of wraps around both of them to kind of fasten them in place, and it'll be just fine and still blend in nicely, so don't worry too much about it. The most important thing is just to kind of secure things in place. I'm going to try and see if I can continue the weave a bit and do that single wrap around the inner one. Go back to the outer one, and I am definitely running out of space here. Also on the outer one, because now I'm running into where I have the wrapped loop. So what you just want to make sure to do is when you go to finish off your weaving wires, you always ideally want to wrap them around a single base wire a couple of times, ideally, to make it secure before we cut it off. So I kind of don't have any more space to wrap here now, so I've just wrapped an extra time around that outer base wire with this weaving wire, so I'm going to leave it at that. Literally going to go to the other length we have left and just repeat the same thing. So make our way first of all to reach the corner of the inner wire, work our way around the corner, and then make sure to just do a couple of wraps if we can around both base wires on the very end here, and then until we run into where we have no more space really to wrap, make sure we wrap around a single base wire with the weaving wire by itself before we then go in and cut them off and get rid of the excess. And now I have no more space to wrap, so all I'm going to do is cut off the excess of the weaving wire here. So just cutting it off, so make sure the end is just long enough so that I can grab my pliers here and tuck it away, basically in between the base wires, so the end is not sticking out towards any skin or clothes while we'll be wearing it. And of course just do the same with the other length as well. Get rid of that and then just tuck it away. And there we have the main part finished. Now all that's left to do is attach your findings to the ends here, and then we just need to shape it, of course. So to shape it, you can of course shape it around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel, or you can use your hands and fingers. So just go in from one place and start putting a gentle curve into it. Obviously make sure the front of the piece is facing outward, and go from side to side, gradually adding more and more of a curve. So don't just go into one place and put a big bend, because that'll put it out of shape, but as you can see, go back and forth gently, adding a bit at a time, working our way towards getting the two ends close enough so we can obviously use the clasp. Just work your way back and forth until we can then use our clasp, and then it's finished and ready to wear. And that is how we make this pretty simple wirework bracelet, but it ends up with a beautiful look to it because we're using that gallery wire that already has a beautiful design in itself. Or like I said, of course you can use wire to make your own braid and otherwise use the same principle. And this would also be perfect for oxidizing because of all that texture from both the gallery wire itself, but also from the weaving. But of course that's completely up to you. So whether you want to make it in the same colors like the one I demonstrated today, or contrasting colors, so it really makes the gallery wire stand out even more and gives a very interesting look to it as well. That's also completely up to you. And don't forget, there will be links and discount codes in the description box down below. And if you want to see more tutorials from me within many different mediums, I have loads on my channel, so feel free to check that out. Of course, subscribe if you want to, feel free to like and share. And otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.